Good morning, family. Welcome to today's Lessons for Life. Today is Monday, November 10th, 2008. And today we're reading Genesis chapter 42. And there's a lot in this chapter. I'm only actually going to touch on one thing. There was some more I got from it. I'll probably add it to the blog. So you can check the blog. And if you read through it, I encourage you to read through it. And you can email us and we'll add it to the blog as well. But Genesis chapter 42. And the beginning of it, now we're talking, remember Joseph was with Pharaoh. He's second in command. And there's famine now in the land because there's no food. So his father Jacob and his brothers are still back in Canaan, and there's famine there too as well. So they have no food. And at the beginning of the chapter, the first two verses I'm going to talk about this morning, Jacob is basically looking, and he's saying, so I can imagine that, they're sitting around, and Jacob says, why are you looking at each other? He hears that there's food in Egypt, so why are you looking at each other? And this actually reminds me a lot about what we learned about yesterday, and some of the stuff we even talked before earlier in Genesis. But he says, why are you looking at each other? Go down to Egypt so that we may get some food so we can live and not die. So why is it, he's saying to his sons, why are you just sitting around? When there's, we hear there's food in Egypt, you may not want to take the journey, you may not want to make the trip. But if you don't do that, we're going to just sit around here and die. Looking at each other is not accomplishing anything. And in order to live, we need to make that trip, or you need to make that trip down to Egypt to get the food. And like I said, this actually reminded me a lot about what we were even talking about yesterday in service, where you have to get to that point where, you're desperate for that change. Because if you're doing the same thing over and over and over and over again, and you're getting you're sitting there and you're not getting that food, you're not getting the thing that you need, and you're just looking at each other like his brothers are there looking at each other. You have to make maybe a drastic change, even like how Jacob is telling them they got to go into Egypt and get that food. Maybe it's a long trip, a long journey, but there's something needs to change in order for you to get a different result. And so that's the important lessons for life that I want us to get today. Basically, you got to get to that point where you're desperate, where you're going to make that change in your life to get the result that you want in your life. Because you sitting around and looking around and just looking at the situation and circumstances isn't going to accomplish anything. It's not going to get anything done. And when I think about even when we were, as Mommy and I were having children, having more children, and it was just like all these different things. There's now more responsibility, of course, that you have each child. And even I remember when we had Jason, that I remember speaking to Grandpa, Mommy's dad, and we had told him that we're gonna have a son, and then he was concerned, of course, which is normal, but he was concerned, and he was like, what are we gonna do? And I think I was having a conversation with him at the time, and I said to him, no matter what, I'm gonna do what's necessary in order to take care of the family. So I knew I was gonna be, no matter what was gonna come up, I was going to be desperate enough to do whatever it took to take care of my family. And then even as each child comes along, there's more stuff, but there's always, I guess, that motivation. And that's why I know every time we have a child, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, that there's that desperation and motivation that's going to push me to do something to make sure everything is taken care of. And that's even what we're seeing here in this chapter, that we're not going to just sit around. You shouldn't just sit around waiting for things to happen for you. You got to take up the initiative. You got to maybe go down into Egypt as his brothers did and get that food for your family. Do whatever's necessary so you can be successful. Because even as we learned earlier in the chapter in Genesis about when you're working with the Lord, then all things are possible. It's like we read before. Is anything too hard for the Lord? No. So now, if you have been partnered, if your consciousness is that your partnership with the Lord, so that you're working with the Lord, then there's nothing too hard for you. But then you have to get yourself up and move out of Canaan and go into Egypt to get that food. So you can't just sit around and wait for things to happen. You got to make those changes. And you know what? When you're working with the Lord, failure is not an option. Failure is not an option because there's nothing too hard for the Lord. So when you're working with Him, nothing is too hard for you to accomplish, as long as you have that consciousness that you're working with Him. So I believe that is a tremendous lesson for life that we can learn this morning. Just even really on the first 2 verses of this chapter, I believe that you can't just look around just like how his brothers were looking at each other. Jacob said to them, we know there's food in Egypt, so you got to get up and you got to go down to Egypt, because if you don't, we're going to die. So you got to get to that point where there's nothing to lose, and I like to say it like that. There's nothing to lose, because if you don't get up and go, then you're going to have a death. So by going, there's nothing to lose, because if you stay, you're going to suffer. You're going to suffer, and if you get up and go, then you have that. You're making yourself the opportunity to get what you need to get. So that's it for today's lesson for life. I want to encourage you to even as about to close, I remembered even what Bishop has put on to us this year. He told us not too long ago, but it's something that we can actually carry throughout life. And I'm sure whenever you're watching this, years down the road or whatever, whoever may be watching this, that you can use the same thing. And he said to, imagine that this was your last year, that you had one more year left to live. What would you do? If you had one more year left to live, what would you do? And if we live our lives like that, with that constant motivation that we know, okay, we got 1 year left to live, what we do, and you just got to go without any regrets. To go full force with it. Don't pull anything back. Don't hold no punches, but go full force like you have just 1 year left to live. Because a lot of times we go through different things, and we end up regretting it because we didn't actually put our full foot forward. We just maybe half-stepping, or we're doing a little bit, or we're not going fully towards our goal. And like I said, when you have been partnered with God, then all things are possible. Nothing is too hard for the Lord, as we've read before in this book. So live your life as if you have 1 more year left to live. And if you start thinking like that, then you actually start to take full advantage of the opportunities that you have in front of you. You will live to your fullest potential, because you're not then saying, well, I'll put this off, because if you imagine that you had only 1 year left to live, you're not going to do that kind of stuff. And like I said, you have nothing to lose. And I'm going to end with that now. But there's more in this chapter, so I encourage you to read through it and email us, put it on the blog, and we will talk again tomorrow. Create yourself a wonderfully blessed day today. Go ahead and live your life to the fullest, starting today and every day from today. And we will talk again tomorrow.